welcome back to the channel, everyone. Main Loop here with another Planeswalker review. Today we are doing Aminatou, the Fateshifter. And Aminatou is how Google says you pronounce that name, so I'm going with it. Tricolor Walker, same colors as Dakon. Pretty interesting color combo right away. Some of the better colors in the game right now, especially when combined together. But what does she bring to the table that is new compared to Dakon? Well, I think she brings something super interesting, game-changing, I might say. So let's get into it. First, let's look at her stats. We got 129 hit points, really respectable. Don't hate that at all. On the very high end, though, with the way that hit points are slowly creeping up, one day this might just be average, but for now, still on the high end, which is great. Mana bonuses. Similar spread to Dakon as well. It's kind of what they've been doing for the Tricolor Walkers. 2 colors being +4, 1 being a +3, and 2 being -2/-2. Not bad. Definitely better than something like Dahada, which only gets +3 across all of her colors. So that little +1 on 2 colors makes a big difference, especially when you're just trying to cast things from your hand and doing it in a way that doesn't take you too long. Deck limits, 6 creatures, 6 spells, 7 supports. I do like that we get at least 7 supports with her, because you want to be playing a lot of permanents. You can play spells. I definitely built some decks that are a little bit more traditional spell-heavy decks, and it works just fine. The more creatures and more supports you get in her kit here, the better, and we'll talk about why. I don't have a huge problem here. Would have liked to maybe see a few more spells, but I personally am not playing her for spell-heavy combos. Let's get into abilities here. This is where she starts to shine. Universal Conspiracy, Ability 1, 6 Loyalty. Great cost for what you get out of it. Create a copy of the top card of your library, then draw 3 cards. So you're basically going to get 2 of that same card that's on the top of your library. One's going to be a copy and one's going to be the actual card. So you basically fill up your hand just about, because you draw first on your turn, you hit this ability, and then you get an extra 4 cards in your hand. So right away, you have 5 cards in your hand. But that's not all. One of your colored mana bonuses is increased by X until the end of turn, chosen randomly. X is the total base mana cost of those cards up to 15. I wish it was only for the colors that correspond to her, because what I've found is the randomness makes it really hard to predict what you're going to be able to match into in order to take advantage of that mana bonus. So if you're relying on this ability to get you a lot of mana, it may or may not work out. There are times where you'll get lucky and you have a good cascade, and it lets you match a bunch of those that you got a high bonus of. But in my experience, it hasn't worked out as often as I would want it to. But still, very solid ability. For 6 Loyalty, getting so many cards in your hand and the possibility of getting a lot of them some mana is a really strong way to start here. Weaving Your Fate, Ability 2, 12 Loyalty. Exile the first 4 cards from your opponent's library, exile the first 4 cards from your library, then exile 2 opposing cards at random. This can affect vanguards. This is a decent way to remove threats from your opponent's side. The 2 opposing cards at random really is pretty random. Sometimes you'll get the things you really want to get out. Other times you might just exile like a couple of gold or food tokens or whatever, and it doesn't make a lot of impact on you. So the less things your opponent has into play, the better it is as removal. The exiling the first 4 cards from your opponent's library hasn't been that relevant for me yet. That isn't to say that there will be a time where I actually really like this. Like if you pair that with Una, Queen of the Fae, that's an extra 4 mana for when you match a blue or black gem. but that's a pretty niche case. What's actually more relevant is exiling the first 4 cards from your library because of her third ability. So this is helping to fuel her third ability. It's been a while since I've seen a Planeswalker where their third and second ability synergize well. It's usually that the second ability is something that just kind of is a standalone. And for the most part, this one is, but I do like to use this to exile, but I do like this to fuel up my exile for the third ability. And the third ability, Final Destiny, this to me is the game changer. For 18 loyalty, return all cards from your exile into play under your control, including spells. Then your opponent loses X life. X is the number of cards you control, including their reinforcements. Now, why is this such a good ability? Well, for one, it's only 18 loyalty. It's really cheap for what you get out of this. You really don't have to do anything special to get things into your exile. There are cards that will do it for you. All it really takes is just drawing a bunch of cards and then chucking them from your hand. And that's all you need to do to make sure that they go into your exile. And it's really hard for your opponent to empty your exile, if not impossible. So if you build your decks the right way, it's really easy to get all your good pieces from your library into your exile, and then you just hit this ability and you never have to spend any mana to get your most expensive cards into play. All you need to do is just draw into them, then you throw them out of your hand, use this ability, and they're in play for you. And it's all of them. They don't even cap this ability, which you would normally see with a thing even like Dakon, where also a really good third ability, but it's limited to, I want to say, it destroys 10 cards from your library. It's not even limited to supports. You can put in your creatures. So this basically negates the casting cost for many of the things that are going to be in your library. This is just an amazing ability because you can just basically put your entire library into play for free if you so choose. All it takes is just pretty simple strategy of either destroying your library, then exiling it with something like Cease, or what I think is the faster and more efficient way of doing it, although not as big of a initial payoff, which is just drawing a bunch of cards and putting them into your exile. So this really synergizes also with her other abilities because this one, you're exiling the first 4 cards from your library. So if you're not playing a lot of spells, that means you're going to be mostly putting creatures and supports in your exiles from this. And then her first ability, you're going to be drawing a bunch of cards. So if you're drawing a bunch of creatures and supports, you can just put them into your exile. So my favorite way of building for her and just using her is putting a bunch of cards into your decks that draw a bunch. Like that's what I mostly am doing. So how I like to build for her is just putting in a bunch of cards that draw, especially on enter the battlefield, and then just putting them into your exile, saving up loyalty to hit her third ability continuously, and then just every turn putting a bunch of things from your exile into play for free. It's a really effective strategy. It just kind of completely turns the principles of this game on their head because this game is kind of built on the premise that you are matching gems to fill up your cards with mana that are in your hand and then playing them from there. There are a lot of ways to do that, and it's definitely a fine way of going about it. But this Planeswalker does not need to rely on that. It can just put things into play as long as you are able to use their third ability a bunch of times. So I will show you some of my favorite ways of doing that when we get into our deck showcases. But yeah, let me just wrap up what I gotta say about her here. Her pros. It's a great color combo. To me, this is arguably the best third ability in the game just because of the tempo that it creates for your side. You get such a huge advantage over your opponent as long as you have ways to build up loyalty quickly. And she's highly versatile. So you could either play her that way, or you can go, the little bit more traditional route, something like what you would build for Dakon or really any other Planeswalker that can use this color combo. So yeah, I've done it both ways. To me, centering your strategies around the third ability is the best way of going about it. Her cons, her first ability's mana boost is so random that it becomes difficult to rely on for that purpose. And that's not even that big of a downside. So this is really the only part of her kit that I can really knock her for. Everything else is just kind of, you can wish that she had more slots for spells or supports, maybe more supports, just because it would make it easier to put them into play. But you could just go all creatures, all supports, and then that means anything you draw into is something that you can feed to her third ability. So it's really hard to find things to knock her for, to be honest. So with that said, let me show you the decks that I built for her. All right, this deck has a lot of fun stuff happening in it, even though it doesn't have any mythics or masterpieces. So let's go through it one by one and show you what I like about it. So Leyline of the Guild Pact, it's good because not only is it a support card that will be converting a lot of gems to your Planeswalker's colors, but the overflow is also really relevant because it's destroy all gems of your opponent's Planeswalker's colors. And the overflow, this card is exiled from your hand. So that means with their third ability, you could just bring it into play later on. So you don't even have to worry about casting it. You could just bring it back later into play and it'll be just as functional. Unidentified Hovership is a pretty good card because what I did here is I tried to put in supports that have a decent enter the battlefield effect. So this one's good. When this support enters the board, exile target creature. It's also got crew 1, so if it's in your hand and you put creatures into play, it will start to fill it with mana. At the beginning of your turn, manifest Dread, then your first creature gets +X+X. X is the number of creature cards in your hand. Well, we won't actually have a lot of creature cards in your hand. We're going to be putting them in our exile so that we can just bring them out for free later. And then the manifest Dread is just a nice way to have an extra creature on the board if you need it. But it's really about the enter the battlefield effect of exiling a target creature. If you don't have this card, you can just search that term and replace it with something that you do have, and it's just as good. Cryptics, it's not necessarily a card that has a good enter the battlefield effect, but it's just going to help us get some mana and hopefully some loyalty into our Planeswalker. And, just a really solid card to have and use. Vile Mutilator. This is a card I never use because it's a 16 cost uncommon creature. It's got a decent body. It's a 6/5, but really it's in here because when this creature enters the battlefield, destroy an opposing support at random. So this will just be a kind of like a Conclave Naturalist, but for black. And since we're not paying the mana cost on it most of the time, you can just bring it into play and it does its thing, and it's a decent sized creature to attack with. Steam Core Scholar. So this is one where it's going to be here mostly to gain us loyalty. This is going to be a great way to, along with the drawing of cards, we're going to be gaining a bunch of loyalty with all the cards we'll be drawing. I'll show you how we're going to be doing that. But this will be key to being able to spam her third ability or whatever ability you want to use with her. So really key card in here, just a solid creature for gaining loyalty. And mana, actually, because you gain X mana and X loyalty. X is this card's level. When you draw a card during her turn, increase its level by 1. So that is how we build up loyalty to be able to use her abilities quickly and over again. Aurelia, the Law Above. When a creature you control attacks, draw a card, then deal 6 damage to a first opposing creature and gain 6 life. This card is such a good card for Aminatou because we want to be drawing cards. When our creatures are attacking, we're going to be drawing cards, so that's If all of our creatures are attacking, that's 3 new cards in our hand. And then we're also gaining life and dealing damage. So this card is good enough to be in my high rarity decks as well. Well, even Steam Core is too. But I just put her in here because I wanted to keep this deck Peasant. And the other deck that I'm going to show you is going to be really good as well, but I just wanted to showcase different cards in the higher rarity deck. So we're keeping it here, but an excellent card that should be in any Aminatou deck. Got Sunken Citadel for that enter the battlefield effect. When a support enters the board, convert 7 gems to the most present color in the board. And then we're going to increase our positive mana bonuses by 2 until the end of your turn. So does a lot of good stuff for us. If we exile it and bring it back with our third ability, it's going to trigger that ETB. So that will hopefully gain us more loyalty as well. This card, Bottomless Pool, was not one I was using before, but I actually started to really like it. So first of all, when the support enters the board, return target creature to its owner's hand. So it is creature removal when we play with this side of the room. But what I actually really like it for is the other side, Locker Room. When a creature deals combat damage to opposing Planeswalker, draw a card. So we're getting the Aurelia effect, even if we don't have Aurelia in play. And also, we can stack this effect with Aurelia. So if you have 0 cards in your hand, and you play Locker Room, Aurelia, and your other creatures attacking, that means we're going to be putting 6 new cards into our hand at the end of our turn, which then we can exile from our hand on our next turn and use our third ability to bring them all into play. So excellent synergy there. And then we got Case of the Gorgon's Kiss, another one. Untargeted removal when this card enters the board. Destroy an opposing creature card with the greatest mana value. And then the token it creates once it's solved is pretty solid. It's a Gorgon token, which I believe is a 4/4 with Death Touch and Lifelink. So we'll be gaining life back as well as we do with Aurelia. And Banner of Kinship as our finishing move. This card is so good I put it in decks that are full of mythics and masterpieces too. When this support enters the board, all your creatures get +X/+X. X is the total shield of all supports you control. So look at all the other supports we have in this deck. With our third ability, we're going to be putting a bunch of them into play all the time, along with Banner of Kinship. So the buff that we're going to be getting with Banner of Kinship for free, just for putting it into our exile and everything else, when we bring it into play, it's going to be buffing our creatures to an absurd amount, especially if we are able to keep doing it over and over again. Awesome card. Very fun deck to play. It's got tons of synergy in it. For being a deck that has no mythics or masterpieces, it's really dominant. It has answers to all the threats that your opponent might play. It doesn't win as fast as my other decks, but it doesn't lose just the same. It wins pretty easily. I don't think I've lost a battle with this deck yet. Let's move on to my other deck that is just insane dominance. All right, this deck is built on a lot of the same principles as the other one. We're just using stronger cards here, but as you can see, still got Banner of Kinship in here, but I think everything else is a little different. This deck is also built upon putting a lot of things into our exile and bringing them out with their third ability. First things we start with is Loot, the Key to Everything. If we can get this card in our hand to start with or get it into play early, it's going to really help. When this card enters the battlefield, this creature gains shield counter 3. So this is a good card to play, especially if you run into a lot of Rakdos, because the shield counter will help to eat up his destroy card effect. But really, we're playing it because we're going to exile the top 10 cards of our library with it. And then, we get that benefit of just returning a random card from our exile to our hand, and it gains full mana. That's what people are mostly using this card for when they play it outside of Aminatou, but it's got 2 really great effects for her. The main one being actually the ETB effect of exiling the top 10 cards of your library. Our other creature, I don't know if a lot of people are playing this card yet. Doomsday Excruciator. It's a 6/6 creature for 6 mana, which is actually really good. When this creature enters the battlefield, exile the top 6 cards of each player's library. So most of the time, people aren't really going to care about that, but with Aminatou, we definitely are. At the beginning of your turn, increase this card's level by 1. At the end of your turn, this card's level 6 or more. Each player loses X life. X is equal to half your opponent's Planeswalker current life, rounded up. So I think that's probably why a lot of people aren't playing this card much. So we do have life gain to offset that if we need to, but honestly, with the way this deck works, a lot of times you won't even have to get there to that point. But Scales of Shale, we're going to get Lifelink, and we're going to probably put it on Ulamog, the Defiler. And Ulamog is really in here because of the ETB effect. You could put Rakdos in here, it'll do the same thing. It'll serve the same purpose, I should say. But this one has Ward, so it's a little bit more resistant to removal. It's got a 25 mana cost, but with their third ability, we're not worrying about that. But when this creature enters the battlefield or attacks, exile an opposing card with the greatest mana value. So we play that third ability. This comes into play and it starts wiping stuff off their side of the board. Just one of the best creatures in Standard, and it's permanently Standard, so definitely worth chasing. It might be a long time until a lot of you are able to actually get this card from PM2. So start your journey early if you have the resources to do so, because this card is just so good. The veteran players, as they pick up more and more PM2 cards, you will start to see this card more and more. Other things that are helping us move things along, we got combo of Mystical Teachings and Golden Wish. So we get Mystical Teachings where you play Golden Wish. We convert 20 gems to loyalty gems, and we're going to be not only racing to our third ability pretty quickly, but we're also going to be grabbing some artifact supports or vanguards from our library, and those are going to help us out too. Our artifacts are Assimilation Aegis, just, you know, how good this card is. When the support is in play, the first creature opponent controls is disabled, so it's really going to be good for keeping creatures from hurting you much while you build up your side of the board. Kylox's Volt Strider is mostly in here to draw us cards every turn, but if you happen to have one of our spells in your hand, then that gets us right away to being able to cast the Golden Wish and getting all that loyalty. Kaya Intangible Slayer is only here for the drawing 2 cards. So in conjunction with Kylox's Volt Strider, you're going to be able to draw 4 extra cards a turn, and that's going to be fodder for us to throw into the exile and use it to power up our side of the board when we use her third ability. So it's really just there to make sure that we maximize the effectiveness of the third ability. The Banner of Kinship is going to be buffing your creatures up to an insane amount, and you're going to be able to win really quickly with this deck if everything goes according to plan. Fortunately, there are a lot of things happening in this deck that really synergize with each other, so you should be able to set up your side of the board really quickly and dominate with all the things that you put into play. So Ulamog and Assimilation Aegis are keeping you safe. Banner of Kinship is going to be buffing up your creatures to a lethal amount, and then everything else is helping that happen. Scales of Shale is there to recover some life back for you if you get a slow start early. You may or may not need it, but I just like having it in there and knowing that I am going to be able to recover some of the life that I lose on my way to a surefire victory. So I hope you like this deck. I hope that I've shown you an understanding of why I think she is such a great planeswalker with these decks by showing the strategies in play. They're a little bit complex, but when you see them play out like that, it might help you make sense of them. Let's get to the grades. All right, let's first start off with max hit points. Very good max hit points. Just a little bit less than Dakon, but I've not found it to be an issue at all. It's actually on the high end. You would think that a little tiny girl like this would have less hit points, but I'm glad that they gave her a respectable amount of hit points. So I'm going to give her an A+ for them. Just shy of S tier because we just have other planeswalkers that have a little bit higher, but not a complaint at all. Mana spread, I would have liked to see blue and maybe white get the +7, but that's fine. I would have personally liked to see blue and white get the +4 on their colors because it's a little bit easier to create those colors in standard right now, but definitely not anything to be that critical of. Tricolor planeswalkers are always going to have a little bit of a disadvantage to try and balance them out in terms of mana spread. So I understand why, but I can't give it like a super high grade. But B+ is still really good. It's about as good as you can expect a tricolor planeswalker to get in the grade for me. Ability 1, very good ability. The only thing, like I said, it's hard to rely on the mana bonus being the color that you really want, and you just don't know what color you're going to get until you use it. So it's very random and a lot of times doesn't benefit me the way I would want it to. But the rest of the ability is really strong. Gaining 4 cards in your hand is great. So it gets an A- for me. If we could control that randomness just a bit, this would have been an S tier ability for me. Ability 2 is a pretty strong ability as well. Depending on how many things your opponent has into play is going to determine the effectiveness of what the removal part of it is. But exiling 2 cards from their side of the board is usually a really strong ability. And then it's got the added benefit of helping to fuel your third ability. And sometimes I just spam that second ability if I'm not quite ready to use the third ability again, and that helps. So it's also getting an A- for me. If it specifically targeted cards that have the highest mana cost, this would also be an S tier ability, but there I guess needed to be a little bit of balancing, but I mean A- is still a very solid ability. And then ability 3, I mean, you can probably guess. I am so hyped on this ability. I think it's just super OP. To me, for my playstyle and how I like to build things, it is arguably the best third ability in the game. There are very few that come close to it for me. Dakon's third ability is really good. Ren and Realmbreaker's third ability is really good. I think this ability is better than either of those. So it's an S+ ability for me. I love this ability. It is the reason for me to play her. It's awesome. Versatility. So for me, she is super versatile because not only can she run all the traditional ways of building and playing the decks that we already can build with Dakon, she can run a lot of the same strategies that Dakon could. The only thing she's missing is really like graveyard recursion, but I would argue that the exile recursion is better than any of his graveyard recursion abilities. Not only can she run most of Dakon's strategies really effectively, she has an extra layer of functionality that no other planeswalker has to this level. So for me, her versatility is S+. Card utility. Again, going to be a super high grade for me too, because the fact that you don't really necessarily have to pay the mana cost of your permanents, your creatures and supports, means that you don't have to worry about putting a bunch of things that you rely on for gaining mana that you would with other planeswalkers. This third ability alone lets you play things way quicker that you would normally have to spend a lot of time trying to get on the board. And then if you have cards that really the only thing you have to build around is gaining loyalty. And right now it's Golden Wish, Ripples of Undeath, which I didn't even put into any of my decks, but it is a permanently standard card, so you'll always have a way to passively gain loyalty. There are other cards like Fountain Port Bell, which is a common, but it creates a bunch of loyalty gems on Enter the Battlefield. So not only is she going to be running other strategies pretty effectively, but again, the fact that you don't even have to pay the mana cost on a lot of your cards that aren't spells makes her wonderful. So she gets an S in card utility. Fun. I mean, for me, it's so fun to not have to pay the mana cost on a lot of things. I have a blast trying to figure out the best way of maximizing that exile ability. And yeah, I just think that her kit allows you to do all sorts of cool stuff. Super versatile, super fun. Also gets an S. So her final grade for me is going to be F. She is definitely an S tier walker. Definitely the best planeswalker we've got in the game since Grist. I put her on the level of Grist, although I don't imagine her being as annoying to face. The only thing you'll have to worry about when you play against her is trying not to exile her graveyard too much. Maybe don't play Una, Queen of the Fae, against her. But other than that, I don't think she's going to be nearly as difficult of a battle as Grist normally is. So I think she's a great addition to the game. I hope they really leave her third ability alone. It's so good. I don't want them to nerf it at all. I hope that we don't give them a reason to. But yeah, she is definitely worth picking up for money if you're the type of person that wants to support Webcore in that way, or you just want the access to play her quicker because you see how strong she is from the reviews and all that. But when she comes to the game for crystals, which probably won't be for a while, I would imagine, you definitely want to save the crystals for her. So make sure to start stockpiling crystals now. Have just 850 in reserve for when she makes it. I mean, you probably won't see her for like another 4 months or so in the shop. So you got time, but definitely don't miss her when she makes it to the vault. Thank you, Webcore, for giving me the free preview on her. I really enjoyed her. I hope that this is a home run for you guys because as far as Planeswalkers go, she's definitely worth buying, and I hope you saw a lot of her. Yeah, she'll keep me entertained for a while until the next set comes out, and then we'll see what sort of fun things we get from her there. There are a lot of different cards that work for her that I didn't even showcase, things like Cease, Ripples of Undeath, etc. That just speaks to the versatility of her. So whatever we get in our upcoming sets, I hope will benefit her as well. Okay, that's going to do it for me. Hope you enjoyed this review. I had a lot of fun making it, and I'll see you in the next one.